someone acting out an addiction is the equivalent of someone who has a limb trapped under a rock and they're cutting that limb off. So if you're too focused, and when I read this, I said, perfect, like that, it landed, it resonated, because you look at this behavior and you say, what are you doing? Like, how can you cut your limb off? How can you be destroying yourself in that way? And it does. I'm not saying no one's watching pornography for pleasure. No one was watching the amount of pornography I was for pleasure, I assure you that. No one was dependent on it in order to receive the pleasure that it was offering, just the pleasure, because at this point it was demoralization, it was shameful, there was so much about it that I didn't want, but I couldn't stop until I looked under the hood at what it was offering me. So you look at this behavior and you say, why are you cutting off your limb? Zoom out and see it's just trapped under a rock. So what should a person do? And that's what I think for many, many people, it is pure survival. And then understanding the genius of that. Like the brilliance. What was my brilliance as a kid? That I was able to completely escape the discomfort I was in through a variety of different ways. Sometimes I needed pornography, sometimes I didn't. But to be able to just, zone out, to detach, right? I dissociated. I disappeared from the room. I looked like I was there, but I wasn't there. When it was more intense, I needed pornography. But when it wasn't, I was able to disappear in other ways. And now sometimes I have to remind myself, no, check in. It's safe. Like, it's okay. We don't have to. That reaction will still show up sometimes, where it's like, hey, you can disappear in a moment. You can disappear in a moment's notice.
If I'm living for 40, 50 years, or even for 10 years and 15 years with certain neural pathways, this is my survival. You have to be compassionate with the fact that these skills will be triggered 30 years down the line. This was the first 20, 30, 40 years of my life. I can't expect
and it was a great one. And it was an amazing one. Like the fantasy world that this guy created, who you described, like what a gift he had to be able to live in a whole mythical reality. He was just there in La La Land. Now it's hurting him. Okay, great. But it wasn't always hurting him. And this is, the reason I brought it up last time.
It was hurting him, but the alternative was death.
Correct.
The alternative was death.
At that point. And that's right. And now the job for us today is to create a safe enough space for him to say, like, you're okay. If you look at reality today, it's not going to be as dangerous as it was for a 4-year-old. It may be as scary. It may not be as dangerous.
Forced to respond in the same way that you have for 40 years or 20 years or 15 years when a similar threat emerges. You could do it differently. You could also tell your parts that you're not 4 years old. You're 17 years old. You're 20 years
Correct.
old. You're 51 years old.
Right. We're in a different reality today, and we can respond differently. But one of the things I'm thinking about, it's no mistake. I was speaking to someone earlier today who was 60 years old, married for many years, recently had a mushroom psychedelic journey, and recognized all the things he was doing in his life, including cheating on his wife. So this guy was over the moon. I'm perfect. I'm healed. I'm everything else. One of the things he said, can you please speak to my wife so she realizes that I'm different? Right? I said, listen, it's wonderful that you had this experience, but she had the experience of you for 25 years. Like, for her just to let that go isn't as easy as it was for you. He's like, I vomited it all out. I'm a different person. I said, first of all, we don't know that because your experience was a week ago. You're still on it. So it's going to take more than that. But more, even if you really vomited it all out, then it's done and you're not that person anymore. We still have to recognize the pain and suffering that another human being experienced with this person for 20, 25 years. And I just want to be sensitive to that, is that while we're being very accepting and loving towards the person who's causing pain and who's doing all these things, we also have to recognize that while they're fumbling around in the dark, they're hurting someone else. And again, that was my, I speak a lot mostly from experience. And how did I come about to recognize that porn was a problem in my life? Because when I started dating my wife was the first time I really tried to stop. Previously, I had said I'm going to stop, and I did different things, but this was a real concerted effort to stop, and I saw how powerful the urge was. The first fight with my wife, 2 months into the relationship, the first disagreement, I right away was running there. And now when I went there, now I felt the shame. Did I cheat on her? Did I this? Did I that? And the shame grew and grew and grew so much to the point that I ended up cheating on her with with a person, that infidelity. And I saw how crushed she was from it. So eventually, yes, it's fantastic. I get onto a healing path and I recognize my challenges, but her pain is now, this is her pain, right? I've passed something else on to her that is that's her pain and very real for her to deal with. And just because I've made a few changes doesn't mean she's on board and oh, don't worry, I said I'm sorry. Come along for the ride. I'm healed.
So it's so important because very often, addicts who are working on themselves need to know how important it is for them to give validation to their spouses for everything they put them through. Even if they were not malicious, they were just traumatized. That's true. But if I amputate your arm, even by mistake, I have to be able
right.
to validate the blood and the horrible agony that many of these spouses have been through for all these years. And I would say that is also a sign of healing, because part of my trauma is that I can't feel your pain. I'm just trying to
Correct.
survive. And if I'm really healing, if I'm really opening myself up to emotions, my own emotions, part of that is opening myself up to your emotions, and that's going to be painful. I don't want to feel that, because there's going to be a part of me that says, you know what? I don't want to deal with this. Let's just get out of it. And that is part of my trauma. So you have to realize, if you are resistant to really listening to your spouse and tuning into their pain, that is probably resistance that is coming from a wound that I'm not ready to let go of.